Welcome back to the channel. If you're here late at night looking for a story to drift off to, you're in the right place. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. I'm also curious, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now settle in, get comfortable, let the world slow down. At exactly 7:12 a.m. on a cold winter morning in January 1996, the eastern edge of Redwood State University was still wrapped in silence. Classes had not yet begun, and the campus paths were mostly empty, save for the occasional jogger or maintenance worker beginning their shift. For Michael Harris, silence was normal. Michael had worked as a groundskeeper at the university for nearly 8 years. He knew which paths stayed muddy after rain, which trees dropped the most leaves, and which corners of campus were rarely visited. That morning, his assignment took him to Aldergrove, a narrow stretch of woodland bordering the science complex. It was an area students avoided, not because it was dangerous, but because there was simply nothing there. No benches, no lights, no reason to linger. Tucked deep inside the grove sat an old heating substation that had been shut down years earlier. The building was fenced off, its windows boarded, its doors rusted shut. To Michael, it meant something else entirely. Fewer trash bags, less walking, an easy morning. He remembers humming to himself as he pushed his cart down the dirt path, the sound of gravel crunching softly under his boots. The air was damp, the trees stood bare, their branches skeletal against the gray sky. Then he saw the stain. At first it looked like rust, a dark smear across the leaves near the path. Michael slowed, confused. Alder Grove was quiet, but it wasn't abandoned. Kids passed through sometimes, animals too. He followed the trail. Each step made his stomach tighten. The stain grew darker, thicker, and then it disappeared into the brush. Michael hesitated. Later, he would say that curiosity saved others from finding it first. At the time, all he knew was that something felt wrong. He pushed aside the low branches and stepped forward. What he saw stole the breath from his lungs. A body lay twisted among the leaves. For one brief, merciful moment, his mind tried to protect him. Maybe it was an animal. Deer wandered into the grove sometimes, coyotes too. But no animal wore jeans. The young woman was lying on her back, partially obscured by brush. Her jacket was missing, her shirt was torn, her skin was pale against the dark ground. Michael noticed the wounds before he noticed her face. Long, shallow cuts marked her arms and torso, uneven and deliberate. Then he saw her head. He staggered backward, his legs weak, his hands shaking so badly he dropped his radio. The injuries were severe enough that he could not recognize her. He could not even look for long. Michael ran. He didn't remember how fast he moved, only that his lungs burned and his heart hammered as if trying to escape his chest. He flagged down a campus security officer near the main quad, barely able to speak. Police arrived within 40 minutes. The grove was sealed off, yellow tape cut through the trees like a wound of its own. Local officers, campus police, and forensic specialists moved carefully through the underbrush. Even the most experienced among them grew quiet as they took in the scene. The preliminary assessment was grim. The victim was female, likely young. The injuries suggested prolonged violence. Sharp force trauma was present across much of her body. Blunt force trauma to the head appeared to be the cause of death. No identification was found, no weapon was recovered. Because the crime scene lay within walking distance of the university, administrators were alerted immediately. Classes were not canceled, but security presence doubled. Parents began calling. Rumors spread faster than facts. By noon, whispers of a murder circulated through lecture halls and dormitories. Detectives faced one urgent question: who was she? The assumption came quickly and naturally. A university campus rarely attracts random victims. Students walked these paths, students used the shortcuts, students lived nearby. Investigators contacted housing administrators and residence advisors asking for reports of missing students. At first, nothing stood out. No one had reported a disappearance overnight. Then, a clerk from the Horizon training residence spoke up. Horizon was not a dorm in the traditional sense. It housed participants in a federal vocational initiative designed for young adults who couldn't afford college. The program offered technical training, shared housing, and strict curfews. The clerk mentioned a name: Lena Morales, 19 years old, enrolled in computer systems training. According to the logbook, Lena had signed out the night before at 8:05 p.m. She had not signed back in. 3 others had left with her. Only 3 had returned. Detectives requested the sign-out sheets and reviewed surveillance footage from the building's entrance. The timestamps matched. Lena had left with 2 women and a young man. They appeared relaxed, laughing, nothing unusual. By mid-afternoon, dental records confirmed the identity. The body found in Alder Grove was Lena Morales. Her mother was notified just before sunset. Lena had grown up in southern Georgia, the oldest of 3 siblings. Friends described her as shy but determined. She had enrolled in the Horizon program after her family lost their home, hoping to gain skills that would lead to stable work. She called her mother every Sunday, sometimes more. Her last call had been 2 days ago. As news spread, fear took hold. Students avoided wooded paths, ride requests surged, campus police escorts worked overtime. Meanwhile, detectives turned their attention to the 3 people last seen with Lena. They were brought in separately. At first, the stories aligned. They said they'd gone out together to grab snacks and walk around campus, that Lena had decided to head off alone, that nothing seemed strange. But cracks appeared quickly. One of the women, Erin Walsh, appeared nervous. She avoided eye contact. Her hands trembled when asked simple questions. The second woman, Dana Brooks, stayed silent for long stretches before answering. The young man, Ryan Keller, spoke confidently, almost rehearsed. Then another detail surfaced. A campus officer reported finding a leather jacket near the training residence laundry room. It had been left behind overnight. Erin confirmed it belonged to her. Inside the pocket, forensic technicians discovered something wrapped in tissue, a small fragment of bone. Lab analysts were cautious, but experienced eyes recognized the structure immediately. Human cranial material. Before detectives could confront Erin again, a student from the training program approached campus police with disturbing information. That morning, in class, Erin pointed to dark stains on her shoes and smiled. "This isn't dirt, it's blood." Then she laughed. The student said Erin went on to describe hurting someone, cutting them, using a rock. At first, the class thought she was joking. Now, no one was laughing. Detectives regrouped. The tone of the investigation shifted. Lena Morales had not wandered into danger. She had been led there. And whatever happened in Alder Grove the night before was not spontaneous. It was planned. The investigation no longer centered on whether Lena Morales had been murdered. That question had been answered in Alder Grove. What detectives now needed to understand was how a young woman could walk out of her residence with people she knew and end up dead less than 12 hours later. To find that answer, they had to go back to the night Lena disappeared. According to the Horizon Training Residence sign-out log, 4 names appeared together just after 8 p.m. Aaron Walsh, Dana Brooks, Ryan Keller, Lena Morales. The entry was ordinary, written in the same hurried handwriting used dozens of times each week. No notes, no warnings, no indication that the night would end differently from any other. Security cameras captured them leaving the building. The footage was grainy but clear enough to show relaxed body language. Aaron walked slightly ahead, talking animatedly. Dana followed close behind. Ryan carried a backpack slung over one shoulder. Lena walked last, her hands tucked into her jacket pockets. They looked like friends. Investigators reconstructed the evening through interviews, phone records, and the eventual confessions that would come later. Piece by piece, a clearer picture emerged, and it was far more unsettling than a random act of violence. Lena had not planned to go out that night. Multiple classmates confirmed she had mentioned feeling tired. She had an early training session the next morning and planned to stay in, but Aaron had pushed the idea of going for a walk, framing it as harmless. Just some air, maybe snacks from the campus store, nothing serious. Lena agreed. It mattered later that she agreed willingly, that she trusted them. The 4 walked through the well-lit areas of campus first, passing the library and student center. Surveillance cameras caught them near the science complex around 8:40 p.m. After that, the cameras stopped. Alder Grove lay just beyond their reach. Detectives would later learn that the group had discussed the Grove days earlier. Aaron Walsh had been the one to bring it up. Aaron was 20 years old, outspoken, unpredictable, and known for dramatic behavior. She often joked about violence in ways that made people uncomfortable. Some classmates dismissed it as attention-seeking. Others avoided her altogether. Dana Brooks, quieter and more withdrawn, followed Aaron closely. The two had become inseparable within weeks of joining the program. Dana rarely contradicted her. When Aaron spoke, Dana listened. Ryan Keller fit somewhere between them. He was not particularly dominant, but he wanted to belong. He laughed when Aaron laughed. He echoed her opinions. He rarely challenged anything she said. Lena, by contrast, was cautious. She kept to herself. She had friends, but she was not impulsive. That made what happened next all the more disturbing. According to later testimony, Aaron had been talking about hurting someone for days. At first, it sounded abstract, dark humor, shock value. But then the jokes grew more specific. She talked about testing limits, about seeing how much someone could take. She spoke in hypotheticals, but her tone was calm, curious. Dana nodded along. Ryan did not stop her. Lena, investigators believe, did not fully understand what was being discussed until it was too late. When they reached the edge of Alder Grove, Aaron suggested taking a shortcut. It would save time, she said. The grove was quiet and the moonlight was enough to see by. Lena hesitated. That hesitation mattered. Witnesses later recalled Aaron teasing her gently, calling her cautious, saying it would be fine. Dana added that they'd all be together. Ryan shrugged and said he'd walked there before. Eventually, Lena agreed. The path narrowed quickly. Trees closed in. The sounds of campus faded. According to forensic analysis, this was where the dynamic shifted. Investigators believe the attack did not immediately begin. There were no signs of struggle near the entrance of the grove, no broken branches. Lena walked willingly deeper inside. At some point, Aaron stopped. She turned around. What happened next would later be described in fragments, inconsistent accounts, half-truths, but certain facts were undeniable. Lena was struck from behind. The weapon was improvised, a rock taken from the ground. The first blow did not kill her. Medical examiners would later determine that she remained conscious for a period of time. What followed was not a single act of violence, it was a sequence. Dana participated, Ryan did not intervene. The forensic evidence supported this. Multiple wound patterns, multiple angles, multiple hands involved. The most chilling detail for investigators was not the violence itself, but the lack of panic afterward. Phone records showed that Ryan sent a text message less than 10 minutes after the estimated time of death. It was casual, unrelated, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. Afterward, the group did not run, they walked back. At some point near the edge of campus, they separated. Aaron and Dana returned together. Ryan took a longer route. Lena never returned. Back at the Horizon residence, Aaron and Dana cleaned their shoes in the laundry room sink. Surveillance footage captured them entering shortly before midnight. They stayed inside for almost 40 minutes. Investigators later recovered traces of blood from the drain. Ryan returned alone and signed in just after 12:30 a.m. No one reported Lena missing. That silence became one of the most painful aspects of the case. Detectives would later say that if someone had spoken up sooner, if an alert had been raised that night, the outcome might not have changed, but the sense of abandonment could have been avoided. The next morning, Aaron attended class. So did Dana. Ryan did not. During a lecture, Aaron began whispering to classmates. She made comments about blood, about hurting someone. When questioned by an instructor, she smiled and said she was joking. That was when a student decided to report her. When detectives brought Aaron back in for questioning the second time, the tone changed. They did not accuse her outright. Instead, they laid out the evidence slowly. The jacket, the bone fragment, the surveillance footage, the inconsistencies in her timeline. Aaron listened calmly. Then she began to talk. Her confession was fragmented and detached. She described the night as if recounting a movie she had watched rather than something she had done. She admitted to striking Lena first. She described feeling curious rather than angry. Dana's confession followed. Dana cried. She claimed she had been afraid of Aaron, that she didn't know how to stop what was happening, that she felt trapped. Investigators noted, however, that she had multiple opportunities to leave. Ryan's interview was the shortest. He admitted he had been there. He admitted he did nothing. He said he was scared. That, prosecutors would later argue, was not enough. By the end of the week, all three were charged. As news of the arrests spread, the university community struggled to reconcile what had happened. These were not outsiders. They were not strangers lurking in the dark. They were classmates. They were people Lena trusted. And the most disturbing realization had yet to fully set in, because what happened to Lena was not driven by rage, desperation, or circumstance. It was driven by curiosity. The trial of the state versus Aaron Walsh, Dana Brooks, and Ryan Keller began 8 months after Lena Morales' death, but by then the emotional weight of the case had already settled heavily over Aldergrove. The town no longer spoke about the crime in whispers. It was discussed openly, carefully, as if naming it too loudly might reopen a wound that had never fully closed. From the first day, the courtroom was full. Students from Horizon training residents filled the back rows. Some came out of loyalty to Lena. Others came out of disbelief. Many sat in silence, still trying to reconcile the people they had known with the actions now laid bare before them. The prosecution's case was not built on mystery. There was no question of who had been present or what had happened in the grove. Instead, the trial focused on responsibility, on intent, on the quiet choices made before and after the violence. The most powerful evidence was not physical, it was behavioral. Prosecutors walked the jury through the timeline again, this time slower, more deliberate. The sign-out log, the camera footage, the lack of urgency, the casual text messages, the return to routine. They emphasized what did not happen. No one called for help. No one ran for campus security. No one told a friend. That silence, the prosecution argued, was not fear, it was indifference. Aaron Walsh's psychological evaluation became a central point of the trial. Court-appointed experts described her as emotionally detached, highly suggestible, and deeply fascinated by control. She did not display traditional signs of rage or impulsive violence. Instead, she exhibited what one expert described as curiosity-driven aggression. She wanted to know what would happen. That phrase echoed through the courtroom. When Erin took the stand, her demeanor unsettled everyone present. She spoke clearly, calmly. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. When asked why she struck Lena, she paused for several seconds before answering. "I wanted to see how it felt." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Dana Brooks's defense painted a different picture. Her attorneys argued that she had been psychologically dominated by Aaron, that she feared retaliation, that she froze under pressure. They presented evidence of Dana's history of anxiety and dependency, but the prosecution countered with facts. Dana had helped lure Lena into the grove. Dana had participated after the first blow. Dana had helped clean the evidence. Fear, they argued, does not explain preparation. Ryan Keller's case was perhaps the most complicated. He did not strike the fatal blows. He did not initiate the violence. But he was there, and he did nothing. His defense leaned heavily on paralysis, on shock, on the idea that some people shut down when confronted with extreme situations. The prosecution responded with a single question that would later become the most quoted line of the trial. When does fear stop being an excuse and start being a choice? Ryan had walked back to campus. Ryan had signed in. Ryan had gone to sleep. The jury listened. Over 3 weeks, the courtroom absorbed testimony from forensic analysts, psychologists, classmates, and law enforcement. Lena's parents spoke briefly, choosing not to dwell on details. Her mother simply described who Lena had been: careful, kind, trusting. That trust, she said, had been weaponized. When closing arguments ended, the jury deliberated for 4 days. The verdicts, when they came, were unanimous. Aaron Walsh was convicted of first-degree murder. Dana Brooks was convicted of second-degree murder and conspiracy. Ryan Keller was convicted of felony manslaughter and failure to render aid. Sentencing followed 1 month later. Aaron received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Dana was sentenced to 40 years. Ryan received 20 years. The courtroom remained silent as each sentence was read. There was no shouting, no outbursts, just the quiet sound of pages turning and the heavy realization that nothing could be undone what had already been done. In the months after the trial, Horizon training residents implemented sweeping changes. Curfews were tightened. Mental health screenings became mandatory. Staff training was expanded to recognize warning signs that had previously been dismissed as personality quirks. But no policy could fully address the deeper question the case had raised. How does violence grow unnoticed? Psychologists would later study the case, focusing not just on Aaron, but on the social environment around her. They noted how alarming statements were minimized, how discomfort was reframed as humor, how people assumed someone else would intervene. The crime, they concluded, was not invisible. It was ignored. Lena Morales was laid to rest on a cold afternoon beneath a pale sky. Her grave overlooked a quiet field. Students left handwritten notes, small tokens, apologies. Many wrote the same thing: "I should have said something." Years later, the grove where Lena died would be cleared, new lighting installed, a memorial plaque placed at the entrance. It bore her name and a simple inscription: "Trust should never cost a life." The case remains a point of study in criminal psychology courses and ethics seminars, not because it was particularly complex, but because it was disturbingly simple. There was no mastermind, no elaborate plan, no moment of uncontrollable rage, just a series of small decisions, each one easier than the last. And that is what makes this story linger. Not the violence itself, but the quiet before it. The moment when someone could have spoken, could have stepped away, could have broken the chain. They didn't. And because of that, one life ended, and 3 others were permanently defined by a single night in the dark. This was not a story about strangers. It was a story about trust, and how easily it can be betrayed. The night the sirens echoed through the palm-lined streets of Seabrook City, few people imagined they were hearing the collapse of one of the most powerful men in Florida. For decades, his name had symbolized success, generosity, and the American dream. By sunrise, that name would be whispered with fear, disbelief, and unanswered questions. Seabrook City sits along the Atlantic coastline, a place where luxury condos rise beside historic neighborhoods and money flows as freely as ocean air. Tourists come for the beaches, investors come for opportunity, immigrants come for hope. And once, so did Alejandro Cruz. Alejandro was not born into wealth, he was born into loss. In 1958, in a crowded district of San Esteban, Cuba, Alejandro entered the world as the eldest son of a small shopkeeper. His father ran a corner hardware store, his mother kept the books. It was a modest life, but it was stable, until politics erased everything. When Alejandro was 10, the government seized the shop. Overnight, the family lost their income, their security, and their future. Within a year, Alejandro's parents made the hardest decision of their lives. They fled. The Cruz family arrived in Florida with 2 suitcases, no savings, and no guarantees. Alejandro's father found work hauling pipes. His mother cleaned office buildings at night. Alejandro went to school during the day and worked after class, learning early that survival depended on endurance. Unlike other boys his age, Alejandro didn't dream loudly. He watched, he studied, he listened. By high school, he understood something crucial: skills mattered more than luck. After graduation, Alejandro apprenticed with a construction crew. He learned plumbing, electrical work, project coordination. He asked questions others didn't bother asking. He memorized how costs were calculated. He noticed where waste occurred. At 24, he borrowed a small sum from his father and launched Cruz Plumbing Services. The early years were brutal. Missed payments, broken equipment, long nights sleeping in his truck. But Alejandro did not quit. By 30, he had contracts across 3 counties. By 35, he expanded into residential development. By 40, he founded Cruz Urban Development, a company specializing in affordable housing for immigrant communities. The timing was perfect. Florida was growing fast. Hispanic communities needed homes. Alejandro understood them better than anyone. His company built neighborhoods, schools, retail spaces. Over 2 decades, they completed more than 15,000 housing units. His wealth multiplied quietly. By the time Alejandro turned 50, financial magazines described him as self-made, visionary, and untouchable. He owned waterfront estates, a private yacht, and investment stakes in banks and infrastructure projects. He donated generously to universities, hospitals, and public parks. From the outside, his life looked flawless. And then there was Luciana Cruz. Luciana was born in 1970, also in Cuba, into a working-class family that immigrated to Florida when she was young. She was intelligent, poised, and striking without trying to be. When Alejandro met her, she was 17, helping her parents run a small neighborhood shop. He was nearly 30. The age difference raised eyebrows. Her parents objected. Friends warned her. Alejandro persisted anyway, showering Luciana with attention, travel, and promises of stability. Over time, affection grew into devotion. They married 5 years later. The wedding was extravagant. Hundreds of guests, business partners, politicians. Only a handful from Luciana's side. She didn't mind. She believed she had married for love. For years, that belief seemed justified. Luciana supported Alejandro tirelessly. She managed their household, raised their 2 daughters, represented the family at charity events. She trusted him completely. Together, they became a power couple. Newspapers praised their philanthropy. Photos of them smiling beside governors and senators filled local media. But beneath the polished surface, cracks began to form. Alejandro controlled everything. The finances, the properties, the companies. Luciana's access to money was limited. Decisions were made without her input. Documents were placed in front of her to sign, often without explanation. He told her it was for protection, for simplicity, for trust. She believed him until she didn't. In 2018, after more than 25 years of marriage, Luciana discovered Alejandro was having an affair with a younger real estate consultant from his firm. The discovery wasn't dramatic. No lipstick, no late-night phone calls. It was a calendar reminder that synced accidentally to a shared device. The betrayal shattered her. Luciana confronted Alejandro. He apologized, promised it was over, swore his family came first. For the sake of their daughters and their history, Luciana agreed to try again. What she didn't realize was that this moment marked the beginning of something far darker. Within months, Luciana began to feel ill. At first, it was dizziness, then nausea, then sudden weakness that sent her collapsing to the floor. Hospital visits became routine. Doctors ran test after test. No clear diagnosis. Stress, they suggested, anxiety, hormonal imbalance. The episodes grew worse. Hair loss, breathing difficulties, irregular heart rhythms. At one point, she lost consciousness while alone at home. Ambulances came, specialists consulted, medications prescribed. Nothing explained the pattern. Alejandro appeared concerned. He drove her to appointments, spoke calmly with doctors, encouraged rest. Behind closed doors, Luciana began to feel afraid. Her condition improved only when she was away from home. In late 2020, Luciana attended a high-profile charity luncheon in Seabrook City, attended by politicians, judges, and business leaders. As a contribution, she brought a homemade dish Alejandro had brocade for her that morning. Within an hour, several guests became violently ill. Emergency services were called. More than 10 people were hospitalized with symptoms of poisoning. Investigators traced the illness back to the dish Luciana brought. Tests found nothing conclusive. The case was quietly closed. Luciana never ate food prepared by Alejandro again. Over the next year, her health continued to decline. More hospitalizations, more unexplained symptoms. At one point, a pacemaker was implanted. Then finally, a breakthrough. At a research hospital out of state, specialists discovered traces of a synthetic opioid in her bloodstream, one she had never been prescribed, a substance powerful enough to suppress breathing and disrupt heart function. Someone had been poisoning her. Luciana didn't cry. She packed a bag. Within days, she moved out. and for the first time in years, her health improved. That's when she filed for divorce. Alejandro's response was immediate and cold. He agreed to separate, but offered a settlement far below half his wealth. He cited a prenuptial agreement signed decades earlier, one Luciana barely remembered signing. When she refused, something inside Alejandro shifted. The man who built everything now believed he was about to lose it all, and he would not accept that quietly. Once Luciana left Alejandro's mansion, she felt a mix of relief and fear. For the first time in decades, she could breathe without hesitation, but the freedom came with a heavy price. She knew Alejandro would not let go easily. He had built his empire on control, precision, and fear, and now, facing a loss of both wealth and influence, he was cornered. Desperation made him dangerous. Luciana moved into a modest apartment in Baywood, a quiet suburb of Seabrook City. She kept a low profile, using a new phone and avoiding public appearances as much as possible. For a time, she thought she was safe. Her daughters attended school nearby, her friends visited discreetly, and for the first few weeks, Alejandro seemed preoccupied with his construction projects and corporate meetings. But the calm was an illusion. It began subtly. Strange vehicles lingered outside her building. A man with a baseball cap and sunglasses appeared on her street at odd hours. A few days later, her sister, Isabella, who had been supporting her throughout the divorce, called with alarming news. Her car tires had been slashed while parked at her home. At first, Luciana hoped it was coincidence, a random act of vandalism. But when another vehicle belonging to Isabella caught fire weeks later, she realized this was no accident. The attacks escalated rapidly. Luciana began noticing small, ominous signs. Doors she was sure she had locked were found ajar. Packages delivered to her apartment were empty or tampered with. A car attempted to force her off the road one evening while she was returning from grocery shopping. The driver disappeared before she could see his face, leaving her shaken but unharmed. Authorities were involved, but without direct evidence linking the attacks to Alejandro, their hands were tied. He had carefully planned every move, leaving no fingerprints, no electronic trails, and no witnesses. Those who might have known, employees, contractors, acquaintances, either feared him or were financially tied to him. Still, the danger was real. Luciana hired a private investigator, Marcus Reyes, a former federal agent known for tracking high-profile threats. Marcus was methodical, professional, and unafraid to confront powerful adversaries. Within days, he uncovered a chilling pattern. Each incident appeared to originate from Alejandro's inner circle, but the orders were indirect, relayed through middlemen to create plausible deniability. The first breakthrough came when Marcus traced a series of encrypted messages between a known criminal, Victor Bennett, and a man named Ramon Villar, a former construction worker with history of organized crime ties. Bennett had attempted to intimidate Luciana with threats, and Villar acted as the intermediary. The financial transactions revealed that Alejandro had been funding these operations discreetly, paying hundreds of thousands to ensure the attacks continued without leaving evidence. Luciana, already exhausted from years of medical trauma, felt a chilling realization. The man she had loved, the father of her children, and once her protector, was now her pursuer. Her daughter, Amelia, was only 26, living with her in the apartment, and the thought of Alejandro's wrath reaching her filled Luciana with terror. By the summer of 2022, the attacks became near lethal. One early morning, as Luciana drove to a church service, a masked gunman emerged from the shadows at her driveway. She slammed on the brakes, swerved into the yard, and narrowly avoided a collision. The gunman, realizing she had escaped, fled, leaving tire tracks in the soft grass. Her daughter had witnessed the event from the window and ran screaming to her mother. This incident prompted immediate FBI involvement. Agents arrived at Luciana's apartment, offering round-the-clock protection, yet Alejandro remained untouchable. He never appeared in person, never left digital trails, and continued his business as usual, projecting calm and stability in the public eye. Friends and neighbors saw him as the devoted husband he once seemed to be, oblivious to the trail of fear and violence trailing his family. While the FBI investigated, Luciana faced a more personal terror. Her health, already fragile from years of mysterious poisonings, began deteriorating again. Marcus discovered that Alejandro had continued subtle attempts at poisoning using proxies who were instructed to administer minuscule doses that mimicked natural illnesses. Over time, these doses had damaged her cardiovascular system, caused nerve pain, and weakened her immunity. Every hospital visit, every medication adjustment, and every diagnostic test became a tense game of survival. Alejandro's obsession grew when he realized that Luciana intended to claim her full share of the divorce settlement. Despite the prenuptial agreement he had forced her to sign decades earlier, she now challenged its legality in court, citing coercion and mental duress at the time of signing. Alejandro, a man who built empires on risk management, was now facing a legal battle that could strip him of half his wealth. In his mind, Luciana's victory was unacceptable. In late 2023, the situation escalated to organized attacks. Two of Alejandro's employees were coerced into committing arson at Isabella's home. Surveillance cameras captured a man wearing a hoodie pouring gasoline over parked cars before fleeing. Weeks later, another vehicle exploded outside Isabella's property. Authorities arrested several low-level accomplices, but each claimed they were acting under orders from anonymous employers. Linking them directly to Alejandro remained impossible. Luciana, meanwhile, had taken extraordinary measures to protect herself. She installed reinforced doors, security cameras, panic alarms, and even relocated temporarily to a family friend's vacation property. Marcus coordinated her protection, ensuring that no patterns were predictable. Still, Alejandro's reach was vast. Financial leverage, intimidation, and fear made even the smallest circle of support dangerous. Then came the most terrifying attempt yet. On a late June afternoon in 2024, as Luciana returned from a local church ceremony, a masked assailant blocked her driveway, pointing a gun at her car. Panicking, she accelerated into the backyard, narrowly avoiding a collision with the garage. The assailant tried to cut her off, but her quick reflexes saved her life. Her daughter, hidden inside the home, watched from a window, trembling. The next day, the FBI launched a full raid on Alejandro's mansion in Coral Gables. Agents arrived with armored vehicles, SWAT teams, and tactical equipment. Alejandro, however, did not appear. Hours passed. Flashbang grenades were deployed. Loudspeakers demanded surrender. Still, the massive estate remained silent, seemingly abandoned. At approximately 10 a.m., a single gunshot echoed from inside. Agents rushed in. Alejandro was found in the bedroom, collapsed, a firearm still in hand. At 67, the man who had built one of the most powerful construction and real estate empires in Florida had ended his life. The official cause was ruled suicide, leaving investigators with a mixture of relief, shock, and frustration. Despite his death, the investigation did not stop. Authorities arrested 8 individuals involved in the assaults, arsons, and attempted killings targeting Luciana. Among them were Victor Bennett, Ramon Viller, and several others recruited through Alejandro's connections. Confessions, recordings, and financial trails revealed the shocking truth. Alejandro had orchestrated years of attempts on Luciana's life to prevent her from claiming her rightful inheritance. Bennett, under pressure, explained how Alejandro paid him in multiple installments, totaling nearly $150,000, with additional bonuses for success. Viller acted as the intermediary, coordinating multiple groups of hired criminals, ensuring no single person knew the full plan. Attempted poisoning, arson, vehicular assault, and direct threats were all part of Alejandro's multi-layered strategy to intimidate and eliminate Luciana. Luciana, despite surviving 9 separate assassination attempts, remained resilient. Each encounter left her terrified, but she refused to surrender. Marcus's surveillance and protective measures ensured that no attack succeeded, yet the psychological toll was enormous. Sleepless nights, fear for her daughter, constant relocation, these were her daily realities. As news of the arrests became public, media outlets sensationalized the story. Billionaire turns deadly over divorce, construction tycoon's empire marred by terror, and Florida heiress survives 9 attempts on life. The city of Seabrook was gripped by a mix of fascination and horror. Alejandro had once been a symbol of ambition, and now he was a cautionary tale of obsession and control. Still, the legal battle over his estate was only beginning. Alejandro had arranged complex transfers of his assets to his brother, Mateo Cruz, and other entities in an attempt to prevent Luciana from accessing the wealth she sought. Hundreds of millions of dollars, including shares in Cruz Urban Development, offshore trusts, and real estate holdings, were involved. Determining what belonged to whom became a daunting legal puzzle. Luciana, under Marcus's guidance and with a team of lawyers, began methodically challenging every transfer. Evidence of Alejandro's mental instability, paranoia, and extreme obsession was presented in court. Lawyers argued that any asset transfers orchestrated during his final years were invalid, particularly those executed to prevent Luciana's inheritance. The process was complex, tedious, and exhausting, but she pressed on with determination. Through it all, Luciana's focus remained on survival, justice, and her daughters. Despite the trauma, she took control of her life, refusing to be defined by Alejandro's crimes or the fear he instilled. Her story became one not just of survival, but of resilience and reclamation. The summer of 2024 marked a turning point in Luciana's life. Alejandro was gone, his empire left in chaos, and the law had finally taken steps against those who had carried out his orders. Yet, while some relief came with his death, the battle for her rightful inheritance was just beginning. Alejandro had been meticulous in life, and even in death, he had left behind a tangle of trusts, asset transfers, and corporate maneuvers designed to keep Luciana from claiming her share. The first challenge was the will. Alejandro had drafted multiple documents in his final years, naming his brother Mateo Cruz as primary beneficiary for large portions of Cruz Urban Development, Century Residential Construction, and several real estate holdings. Additionally, he had secretly shifted shares that legally belonged to Luciana into other accounts and entities. For years, he had meticulously prepared his escape from financial consequence, hoping to leave her with nothing. Luciana, however, had legal counsel ready. Her attorney, Mariana Ortega, was known for handling high-profile estates and complex asset disputes. Mariana meticulously combed through decades of corporate filings, bank statements, and contracts. They found evidence that Alejandro had acted with coercion, paranoia, and deliberate intent to defraud Luciana. Multiple asset transfers had been executed under pressure and without her knowledge, grounds for legal challenge. The first court hearing took place in Miami-Dade County in early August 2024. Judge Richard Solano, a veteran of complex corporate litigation, presided. Mariana presented evidence showing that Alejandro had pressured Luciana into signing the prenuptial agreement at 17 under emotional duress and without fully understanding the document's consequences. She argued that the prenuptial agreement was therefore invalid. Next, she presented evidence that asset transfers to Alejandro's brother were made after he had orchestrated repeated assassination attempts against Luciana, proving intent to defraud and manipulate. The courtroom was tense. Mateo Cruz sat stoically, flanked by corporate lawyers, aware that if the court sided with Luciana, a majority of her inherited assets could be returned to her. Luciana herself appeared composed, though her hands shook slightly as she clutched documents detailing Alejandro's malicious actions. Every chart, transaction record, and hospital report was a reminder of the years she had spent surviving, not just an abusive marriage, but near-death experiences at the hands of a man she once trusted implicitly. After weeks of hearings, Judge Solano ruled in Luciana's favor, declaring the prenuptial agreement void due to coercion and the asset transfers executed by Alejandro to his brother invalid. Mateo's legal team filed appeals, but the ruling sent a powerful message. Alejandro's intricate attempts to deny Luciana her inheritance had failed. With legal validation in hand, Luciana turned her attention to Century Residential Construction. The company had grown into one of Florida's largest residential developers, a legacy built almost entirely by Alejandro, but sustained in part by her partnership and support over decades. Many employees and executives were loyal to Alejandro's memory, but Luciana knew that to preserve the company and protect her family, she needed to take control. She assumed the role of acting CEO, stepping into board meetings with determination and clarity. Her first priority was stabilizing the workforce, which had been shaken by Alejandro's death and the ongoing media scrutiny. Luciana held private sessions with department heads, assuring them that operations would continue smoothly and that she intended to honor the company's legacy while restoring a safe, ethical corporate culture. Next came public perception. Alejandro's downfall had been sensationalized in the media, painting the company as a hub of scandal. Luciana launched a campaign to rebuild trust, meeting with investors, clients, and community leaders. She personally visited construction sites, engaging directly with foremen and project managers. Her presence reassured employees that the company was no longer under the shadow of Alejandro's paranoia and abuse. Financially, Luciana inherited not just the construction company, but also significant real estate holdings, trust funds, and offshore accounts. Estimates place the total value at over $300 million. The inheritance allowed her to invest in modernizing Century Residential Construction, implementing sustainable building practices, and expanding into underserved markets across Florida. Within 6 months, the company reported record profits, proving Luciana's leadership and vision were more than a continuation of Alejandro's empire, they were a transformation. Even as Luciana rebuilt her professional life, she focused on personal healing. Years of near-fatal poisonings, physical threats, and emotional manipulation left scars. Therapy sessions helped her process trauma, and she established strict security measures to protect herself and her daughters. The bond with her daughters, Emilia and Valentina, grew stronger than ever. Luciana made it a priority to teach them resilience, independence, and the value of protecting oneself from toxic relationships, even within family. Luciana also turned her experiences into advocacy. She began speaking publicly about domestic abuse, coercive control, and financial exploitation, particularly among wealthy families. Her story resonated widely, giving voice to those who had suffered in silence. She partnered with nonprofit organizations, offering funding and guidance to programs designed to support victims of abuse and domestic violence, proving that even the most harrowing experiences could be channeled into empowerment for others. The legal aftermath was not without complications. Alejandro's hired accomplices, including Victor Bennett and Ramon Villar, were prosecuted for attempted murder, arson, and conspiracy. Each was sentenced to lengthy prison terms, though none implicated Mateo Cruz beyond financial involvement. While justice was served in part, Luciana never let the past consume her. She knew Alejandro's legacy would forever be a cautionary tale, but her focus remained on the present and the future. By early 2025, Century Residential Construction had fully recovered, its workforce stabilized, its projects thriving, and its public image restored. Luciana's leadership style was markedly different from Alejandro's, collaborative, transparent, and ethical. She introduced employee wellness programs, expanded community housing initiatives, and established scholarships for young women pursuing careers in construction and architecture. Her daughters, inspired by their mother's strength, began taking active roles in philanthropic initiatives. Emilia managed community engagement projects, while Valentina oversaw scholarship programs. Together, they created a family legacy of resilience and empowerment, an intentional contrast to the fear and manipulation Alejandro had once represented. The final chapter of Alejandro's story left many reflecting on the dangers of obsession, control, and wealth without conscience. His intelligence and ambition had built empires, but his inability to respect boundaries or act rationally in personal matters ultimately led to his downfall. His fortune, once intended to solidify control, became a tool of liberation for Luciana and her daughters. Luciana herself found a measure of peace. Though scars remained, both physical from poisonings and emotional from betrayal, she had survived every attack, reclaimed her inheritance, and transformed a legacy of fear into one of empowerment. In interviews, she often emphasized the importance of self-advocacy, resilience, and refusing to let trauma define one's future. In the years following, Luciana became a respected figure not just in construction, but in philanthropy, corporate ethics, and women's empowerment. Her story was retold in magazines, podcasts, and television documentaries, not as a tale of victimhood, but as a testament to survival, strategic thinking, and courage. By 2026, Century Residential Construction had expanded into multiple states, pioneering sustainable housing projects and mentoring minority entrepreneurs in real estate development. Luciana's daughters pursued their studies and careers with determination, carrying forward both the company and the family's renewed legacy. Looking back, Luciana often reflected on the journey, from a young bride deceived by love to a survivor of multiple near-death attempts to a woman who reclaimed power over her life and empire. Alejandro's obsession, betrayal, and eventual downfall had left an indelible mark, but they also catalyzed her transformation. Luciana's story ultimately became one of triumph, a testament to resilience, intelligence, and courage. Where fear and violence once threatened to define her life, she chose empowerment and justice. The empire Alejandro had built on ambition and control was now guided by wisdom, compassion, and integrity, an enduring symbol that no matter how calculated a person's cruelty, perseverance and resilience could rewrite the narrative. In the end, Alejandro's death closed one chapter, but for Luciana and her daughters, a new chapter had only begun, one of leadership, influence, and unwavering strength. The scars of the past remained, but they were a reminder of what had been endured and, more importantly, what had been overcome. Luciana had survived the unthinkable. She had reclaimed her wealth, her agency, and her life. And in doing so, she proved that true power is not measured by control over others, but by the ability to rise above betrayal and transform tragedy into triumph.